Today we have a great conversation with Sean Connor, head boys basketball coach at Antioch High School. Coach Connor's 20 years of experience gives him such a great perspective on the game of basketball and coaching. We talk a little bit of everything basketball with Coach Connor on this episode of the After the Timeout podcast.
All right, so Coach, we like to start every episode with our opening tip. And, it's been something I've been thinking about is why people choose, the programs they choose to run. So for you, I wanted to start off with, first of all, why Antioch? What made you decide that it was the program you wanted to interview for, you wanted to lead, and then kind of take us through the process of that interview and when it kind of felt like it was the perfect fit for you.
I actually got comfortable with Antioch with some people that I worked with at DePaul Prep who had lake houses up this way. And so I'd come up here for the summer and hang out a little bit. And even though I grew up in Woodstock, it wasn't a town I was real familiar with because we would never go east. We'd always go west to Geneva and Polo and Dixon, where all my mom's family's at. And then my dad's got family way northern Wisconsin with my mom. So we go north, and I never really came east. And then I had a baseball coach at DePaul Prep, actually ended up coming up to Antioch at the same time I did. And we kind of just talked about like, yeah, it looks like it'd be a great town and a great district to work in. And then conveniently, we were looking for homes. And at the time we were kind of in the Des Plaines Park Ridge area and not exactly in our wheelhouse financially, especially not, as you guys know, a private school salary. So my wife found a house up in Grays Lake. And obviously we're like 15 minutes. We literally live off 83. So it's a 15-minute shop for me to the high school. I actually applied for the job a couple years ago and they hired Tim Bowen, who's been around forever and been doing this thing a long time. And so you really can't get mad when you lose out to a guy like that. He knows what he's doing. And then he's now the head coach at College of Lake County. So when it opened up again, we just happened to be living up here. And I was like, all right, let's try one more time. So I interviewed out. And I'll tell you, I got to make sure I say this, like Eric Simpson at Marist is one of the best dudes out there. Obviously having Tom and my always having my back is helpful. And that kind of helps me navigate the waters. And he got me connected with Eric, and Eric did like an hour and a half on call interview over the phone while he's driving home to Indiana. And that really made me feel confident about the interview. And I can't really say that if I wouldn't have had that experience with him, with an AD, right, that driving you through the tough questions, that I would have been fully prepared. And I walked in the interview with Antioch and had zero butterflies. Like I felt like I was ready to go. And so once I got to know the town, it's really similar to Woodstock, blue collar, kind of out on the rim of the suburbs in the country. Kids work, not just at school and in the weight room and all that stuff, but they all have jobs too, and kind of like my friends that I grew up with. And so the community really just resonated with me from that aspect on a personal level. And so when I kind of got in, like from day one, I've just kind of felt like I belonged.
So in kind of doing our research and kind of learning about you a little bit, we read that you like your players to take ownership of the program. And I think that's said a lot, but it's easier said than done, right? So what are some of the things you do to make your program player-centered? And then, when you have those kids who maybe quite aren't bought in, how do you handle that? And then, how do you increase that buy-in with those kids, but all your kids?
I'll start with the tougher one, right? The getting to buy-in. I'm very big on one-on-one meetings. Same thing I would be as a teacher, right? If I had a tough kid in class. And so, one thing I learned being under a lot of the head coaches I was with, but especially Tom, like he's big on relationships and he has lots of meetings with guys to make sure we're very transparent on this is your role, right? When you hear him talk a lot, he always talks about role. And so I thought it would be very important for me that when I came in to the kids get to know me, to meet with them one-on-one. But we had a exit summer meeting, then a preseason meeting, then a mid-season meeting, and then a summer or a spring exit meeting after the season. right? So I'll mandatorily make them meet with me 4 times a year so that I can make sure that we're on the same page, right? Talking about not just on their on-court development and how they fit with the team, but obviously looking at grades and behavior and those kind of things and making sure we have that in check. So you can imagine, like, outside of those 4 meetings, you guys are head coaches, kids come in your office voluntarily, right? Which is what you hope happens. But also, you may have to pull kids in and say, let's have a meeting. So I feel like having that open door with these kids to make sure that they understand that I'm not hiding anything, right? That's the first way to get buy-in, to make sure that they know when they're in practice why you're making the decisions you're making, right? And so I saw you guys had a data question on here about analytics, but I think Huddle is probably one of the best things that happened for us because, for the most part, it's pretty reliable, right? They're always off a little here and there, but to have that there and be able to show kids like this is exactly why you're in the position you are in terms of your role on the team, I think is helpful. So that's one way. When I took the job too, again, this is something I kind of took from Tom. It's, his goals are win conference, win state, right? Like that's it. It's great to have the tournaments in between. And I think those are great things you learn about yourself and confidence builders. But I wanted to make sure the guys set the bar. Like I think the last time they had been downstate as a school was 1981. Right. And they ended up losing to Quincy, who won it all. So I think you can't get really mad about that. Quincy's got a pretty good history. And so what I wanted to do is make sure that nobody really felt like I was coming in to impose what I felt was best. And so I know if you guys check out our Twitter handle, we have our culture ball. A lot of coaches have culture walls and stuff, but I'm not going to lie, I don't have a whole lot of space to post stuff. If you go to Coach Livatino's office at Loyola, it's like a college office, and he's got all his signs in there and their sayings and their data and, what he tracks. And it's pretty wild, but I don't really have that kind of space. So hopefully I'll build one up one day, maybe in the office I'm in. So we kind of created a culture ball. And I don't know if you guys have some time where you might be able to let me share screen, but I'll kind of share that with you again. But I felt like that was a big piece of our guys learning what we were. And I didn't let them do anything with that till after Christmas, right? Like I felt we had to go through the process. And, we invited seniors back who weren't on the team last year, and they decided to come back out. Obviously having Marshall as a freshman is a big adjustment for people. And then we had a couple kids sit out, for health reasons, or Jake Malks out with an ACL. So these guys really had to redefine what they were as a group, because they didn't have this junior class that they had relied on that was ballyhooed and talked about in town. They didn't fall apart as a group, but guys weren't there. So there were pieces that were gone and new pieces added in. And then, you have the fortunate of having a kid like Marshall be in the program, so I felt like they couldn't really decide what their culture was until we went through the process of the first half of the season, figuring out who we were as a team. And then right after Christmas, we kind of developed that culture ball. Like I said, that we kind of have posted on our different areas. And so I feel like between the meetings and allowing the kids to kind of develop what our identity is going to be as a program, those were kind of our first steps this year in trying to create player ownership.
So really interesting. I like the idea of the culture ball. That's really interesting. I wanted to do a quick follow-up. So, let's say that in those meetings, you have a kid and they're just not buying in. Like they're just not. Like you may think this is their role. They may think this is their role, as we've all experienced. Kind of take me through that conversation.
So it's been good this year. It's been player driven first, right? I've only had a couple kids where the parent came in later. And we got to that point where it's like, okay, we really got to lay it out for everybody to make sure we're on the same page. So when a kid comes in, I'll have the data printed out from Huddle. And the great thing about Huddle too, is it hyperlinks all the video clips, right? So for instance, if I have some kids that are turning the ball over too much, I'll actually sit down and I'm using that as a teaching session, right? So we were giving up like 25 turnovers a game to start the season. It was a rough start. And I think we played 3 conference champs in the first 5 games. So it's not like an ideal situation to be restarting a program, right? And so I'll pull up that game. Okay, you had 7 turnovers. We're going to watch all of them and talk about decision-making, right? And I think that was probably the major emphasis with our team all year. Is a lot of times when I had these meetings with kids, it was really about decision-making. right? Whether you were making a decision on or off ball on defense, or you're making a decision on or off ball on offense. And so to be able to pull up just those specific hyperlinks, right, not have to sift through tape and wait for things, really makes the meeting beneficial for both, because we can be efficient, because you're not spending this time sifting through tape. You're watching it, you're talking about it, you're live. And then that gives you the time for the reflection at the end, right? And we all know as teachers, like, given the time in the classroom, walking around helping 20-something kids, like I feel like I always lost time for reflection, right? Not having enough time to be able to stop and, okay, what does this fit into in the bigger picture for you as a player? And then your role in the team, right? So then we take that data that we looked at, whether it was shot selection, or again, maybe you didn't get in a gap on help side, or you didn't close out with the hand up, right? Being able to talk about specific things and then set goals, right? Like, to me, that's the next piece. Once you see it and you have a chance to reflect on it, now let's set a goal for yourself. What is it we want to accomplish in practice and in games until we have to meet again? So a lot of those meetings occurred the first half, right before we had our mid-season meetings around Christmas, and then try to see if there's been growth, right? And then I did have a couple kids where we had meetings kind of halfway through that conference slate, right, in January. You get around MLK weekend, and okay, hey, let's sit down. All right, you haven't been getting minutes in games. Let's look at what's been going on in practice. So I didn't chart practices heavily this year, but I had probably one of the best managers I'll ever have. I'm going to really miss having him around, but he was able to track some things for me, when we did scrimmages and things, and look at that stuff. But I think once you really are transparent with the kids, they know what they need to work on. It's very easy to sit down and get them at some point to then be honest with you. Hey, how do you think your turnovers were in practice this week in decision making? So we're prepping for Clark, and Terry Head's going to press me the whole game, and hey, you had 3 turnovers in the backcourt, and then you also made a couple in the front court, and they're going to be a lot longer than we are. So, those kind of things, to me, continuous meetings, continuous conversation, continuous goal setting, and continuous reflection. And then turning in the player, right, and saying, okay, what are you seeing? Because if you're not getting their truth and they're just hearing you spit at them about what you see, that kid really, I don't think, is ever going to maybe fully buy in if you're saying, like, they're kind of being hard-headed about what's the truth. So I try to let them speak so I can hear what they're seeing before I tell them my opinion as a coach, which is, I think, probably, another question you guys have is 20 lessons, that you've learned, or 20 years of lessons you've learned is, I've obviously worked under some guys that were very general, and or word generals, right, and telling you, and this is what it's going to be, and that person, the sage on stage. And I've never been that kind of coach. I'm a player's coach, and I want to hear from my guys first so that I can direct conversation and allow them to lead it the best I can, until you do get to the point and say, okay, well, this is what I'm seeing and this is going to be your role. And then that's where, I had a couple parent meetings too, to make sure that we were on the same page, so they're not going home and having a conversation that's not the same as the one that we're having in my office.
So this is obviously something Todd and I can relate to, having both coached in the Catholic League, having both coached in the East Suburban Conference. But obviously, for a long time, you were the sophomore coach at DePaul, as you've kind of referenced. And, we just kind of wanted to talk about that experience a little bit. So what was it like for you personally, coaching in the CCL, where even at the sophomore level, there's elite talent all over the place. And kind of what did those years in coaching in that league kind of teach you?
I was humbled. And when you're in your mid-20s, and I've never been an assistant coach, right? Head freshman coach, head sophomore coach, even for Tom, the 1 year at York, always the head of my AAU team, coach 17U. So I'm walking in and I'm like, I know this game, I'm good. And then you get under a guy like Tom and you realize you know nothing about basketball, and he doesn't make you feel like that, but you just watch what he does at the level he does it at and how he adjusts based on his personnel. And I was like, okay, I got a long way to go, and I always felt I was good with my X's and O's. I didn't know how to teach defense a lick. Right. And so that was the first thing. And I had to do it because, just like Tom, right, when he restarted, and you guys know this, we built from scratch, and he's pulling up everybody. So I'm left with kids who might not even be like starting on the freshman A team, playing at the sophomore level. And as you know, like, I'm not going to lie, if you don't have some dudes that are going to play in college on the sophomore team, you're probably going to get your butt kicked. And so, you know, I think that was humbling for me because it really taught me the importance of defense. And I don't think I would have had the season I did this year if I didn't realize how important it was to teach the guys to guard, right? And do all the little things, diving on the ball, taking charges, you know, value possessions, no live ball turnovers, you know, once you get the ball back. So that experience from, you know, coaching very little talent and having to teach them how to do everything you could to milk out defensive possessions and get good shots. The guys who couldn't get a shot on their own and had a hard time even helping each other get shots, right? To the point where I had a sophomore team that I didn't even have to coach, right? Like you would have had to not know anything about basketball and be oblivious to the game to probably lose with that team I had, right? Brian Matthews, Dylan Arnett. So you have 2 6'8" kids in the front court, and then 3 guys, Rashid, Bello, Jabari Sawyer, and Cam Lewis, who all went on to play D2, D3 college basketball. Like, you know, so that's almost cheating, right? Like you shouldn't have that kind of talent on a sophomore team. So I was spoiled, but I also got my butt kicked for a couple years because I just had guys that we were making the best of what we had and teaching them from scratch. But then we got the feeder program going. Tim Forberg started that when he was there. And then I kind of took it over under Tom's direction, you know, and you guys know, like once you get that going, like that's where you get your depth, right? So now you're not playing 5 guys. You might, you know, I watched Tom Elite 8 downstate, he's playing 6 or 7, where you watch Nashville, they didn't sub the whole game against those guys, right? So having that feeder program, I think 2 or 3 guys out of the 7 Tom was playing this year, you know, we get through feeders. So that was huge.
All right. So you talked about your process at Antioch, you know, but obviously you've been in the Catholic League, you've been around a lot of great coaches, AU ball, all that stuff. So when you're looking for a job and when you're talking to people, right, and networking, what questions should you be asking administrators, athletic directors, coaches to find out if it's that right fit? Because that's a big part of you know, finding a program for yourself. You know, I know personally going through the process when I first started doing it, I didn't know what I was doing, like you kind of said, right? And you had a mentor that kind of helped you through it. And here's some questions. But what questions do you think you should be asking athletic directors, head coaches during the interview process? And maybe what are some of the interesting questions like you've heard of or maybe you were asked along the way?
Yeah, you're kind of foreshadowing because for 30-second timeout, I want to talk about coaching mentoring. So I was going to ask you guys, like, what, you know, whether it's Todd or John, you know, did you guys have anybody you leaned on? Because I'm not going to lie, Matt Monroe, if you can tell, is one of the most organized people, like probably to a extent that it's OCD, right? And he had pages of questions from all the interviews he had been in. Like, did you guys have access to anything like that when you were head coaches?
I would say I had a little bit. I actually have known Matt for a long time. We first coached against each other when we were 6th grade boys, feeder coaches, long ago. But yes, I would say I definitely had mentors of mine that helped me along. I will say that even though Todd and I are kind of in age and experience, I think we've helped each other along. So yeah, I think that's always helpful, even if it's not a mentor, just to have somebody to run ideas off of when you're a head coach, you're applying to jobs. I don't know if that answer was great, but I'll see if Todd can answer that. Yeah,
no, I mean, you know, I was fortunate enough when I really started kind of figuring out what I did. I had a buddy at Oswego East that was an AD. So he had kind of some of those questions he would ask. And then Sean, I know, you know, Troy Johnson, Illinois Stars, he's my guy. So I bounce things off of him all the time. Like, what do you think? You know, what have you heard about the program? You know, kind of things like that, just to get some background on it. You know, and to know going in some things to ask or some things to talk about. So, you know, I just try to find anybody I can or people that I know and just ask questions. And I think I have a whole like list of things. Every time I go to whatever interview, I would just, oh, I've never heard that question before. Let's put it down. Make sure you answer it. So,
yeah, I can relate to that. But yeah, I think, you know, I'm spoiled, right? Like for better or for worse, because I moved around a lot when I was young. You know, you got everything from Rob Judson to Mark Lindo to Phil Ralston to Tom to Terry Head. You know, I've been under some of the better ones. Joe Conroy too. He was at women's D1 for a long time. Then was at Woodstock, and then it was at Kishwaukee. Now he's at Canelan, and now he's at Kishwaukee Community College as the boys head coach. So I feel like I'm very spoiled because none of those guys have ever left my side. Right. And so like, Tom's going to be there, but all those other guys checked in with me all the time, and then having access to a guy like Matt. So he gave me all these questions, and I'm going through and I'm like, okay, well, Matt's applied for public school jobs, but a lot of private too. And you're sitting there like you guys are, the questions you're going to get asked aren't going to be the same. Right. Like I may even sit and talk about religion a little bit in my private school job, but when you're going public school, it's like, hey, you probably want to stay off that to begin with, as I'm coming from church this morning. So I would say this, I think I got fortunate with Antioch in the fact that the school was built in 1915. So like you can look up anything on that town, right? Like photos of when it was built, like there's so much history there. And it was crazy, talk about building culture. Our guys didn't even know what our logo stood for. So like I walk in the first day of camp and I got him in a circle. I'm like, what does this mean? What does this mean? Right? Like circle means unity, arrow means forward, the two feathers mean together. It's like, you guys don't know anything about the history of this school. So that's why we did the 1981 thing, where I brought all the players back and we had them and did a ceremony. So when you talk about asking the right questions, to me, it started with the history. Like, what am I walking into? Right. And there wasn't a lot of basketball success. So, as a coach, then you got to find other stuff, right? Little successes or history to lean on, so I brought in recent players like Kobe Creasy and Dan Philippone that are playing in college. So when I went in and asking questions, I actually abstained from the basketball stuff because I'm trying to figure out, like, why has basketball not been successful for 40 years? So when you get in the interview, right, like I don't know how your guys was. I know it depends on the high school, but I got a horseshoe table of like 20 people, so I see how that can be intimidating. But, I really, with the help of Matt and Tom and Eric Simpson and Phil Ralston, even Scott Henning, I talked to a lot at Geneva, and, Mark and all those guys that were in my corner that I mentioned, like they warned me about like, hey, the community might ask this. The teachers might ask this, the players they had in the room and the students from the school might ask this, so I felt I walked in ready to go on that. And so there wasn't really anything that caught me off guard. I think one question that stood out to me, and you guys can relate to, because you spend a lot more time, you'll have a little more talent coming through the private schools, but recruiting, right? And I'm sitting there going like, I don't have a problem with that. I'm more worried about, do our kids and parents know how to handle the process, right? Do you guys know what you're getting into so you don't get had by somebody trying to take your money saying they're going to help you find a school? So when I walked in, I didn't have a whole lot of questions for them because I had been through it with them before. So I think that was a bonus for me that I'd been interviewed 2 years ago. And I kind of had an idea of what the community was going to say, but things like, parents are saying, hey, it's a blue collar town. There's not a lot of money. A lot of other kids in other communities can go do club and get training and weightlifting training. And it's like, how are we going to work around those things? So I had to have an answer for that. How am I going to get these guys better in the off season when the IHSA handcuffs us with off season training, right? So you got to get creative with solutions like that and be lucky enough to have people in your corner that can help you, that may not be getting directly paid by your program, but hey, we'll offer skills training, at the church down the street, and we'll do it here and the kids can pay this, stuff like that, right? Because it's not in the community. So you got to find a way to get it there, while abiding by all the rules that we got to follow. So that was one of the interview questions stuck out to me, is like, how are we going to develop kids in the community when there's not a whole lot of money, because it's a very blue collar town?
No, and I think that's important, and I think you have emphasized it, but I do think it's important is just that learning from everybody as we go. I mean, young, old. I mean, I've been sitting in this conversation with you for 20 minutes, and I'm already stealing the culture ball. So I think it's, I think that's one of the reasons Todd and I started this podcast, was just to learn from other people as we went. So I do think that's important. So you, speaking of foreshadowing, you kind of foreshadowed a little bit, but you, as we did some research, you've been coaching now for 20 years. And, so in those 20 years, what's been some big changes in your own mindset? And then kind of take us through maybe some changes you've seen in players and parents and admin and those.
So you guys know, being like in that 38 range, there's that whole argument, or like, are you Generation X? Are you a millennial? And we get the Zennial conversation because we got some of that old school, like I had to get up and change the channel on the dial kind of deal. And I'm dead honest with you. My first 2 years as a manager for Rob Judson at NIU, we had VHS, man. So like, I've gone from VHS tapes to trading tape online. I remember when Mark Lindo at Naperville North let me volunteer, and I'm meeting coaches in parking lots, exchanging DVDs, that kind of stuff. So then I sit here and I look at my assistants and I send them out to scout like 2 times each. And I'm sitting here going like, you guys have no idea. And now I feel like I'm the old man, right? So like something like that, like film. Like Judd would call me like 2 a.m. and have me set up film in his hotel room. I was like, why couldn't you tell me to do that at 9 o'clock? So I'm busting the lock off the TV to access the coax in the back, and stacking 2 VCRs on a trunk and running like 5 coax cords. You just think about that stuff. Or like Ray Gooden's been a volleyball coach at NIU forever. And I'll never forget, like his manager was gone and he walked into the basketball office and just had 2 VCRs in his hands and cords everywhere, like, help me, and this guy's one of the best coaches probably in college volleyball. So I just, that kind of stuff makes me laugh. And it's funny because I don't think many people from our generation would realize like that, we were doing that stuff when we first started. And just all the change that's happened just from a film standpoint, right? But then you talk about the style of the game. Like I remember in high school, I'm running 3 around 2 blocker mover because everybody's copying Bob Knight, and then you get to high school and we were there, and Judd studied under Bill Self. So we ran triangle for a while, and then he ran swing. And then, luckily that prepared me because a couple of my first jobs with Joe Conroy and Phil Ralston. Joe ran triangle and Phil runs swing to this day, right, at Glenbrook South. And then going through that, and then getting with Tom and getting more into 5-man motion when we were at York and had David Cohn and Frankie Toohey and some good players there. And so really learning motion concepts as opposed to structured motion, right, where you got only a couple reads you can make, and going to the point where you got to teach kids how to read and react. And I know like Rich Zalewski, that's an assistant at Chris Lake South now, right, but has that, I think it's Better Basketball or something, that Rich was really big into read and react offense. And so I think like, you go to that, right, and then I always prided myself. I work with the big guys at NIU. So I had a lot of bigs in AAU, and I'm feeding the ball in the post, right? And going inside. And now you see how the game is so perimeter oriented. So I just think like from the time of being a manager to now, you look at how much the game's changed, and you just kind of go like, man, where's it going to go next? Like what's going to be the new emphasis, for us to evolve the basketball game outside of bigger, stronger, faster, athletes who everybody can dribble, pass, and shoot. But I'll give you one, like when I got to full package under Steve Pratt 10 years ago, Steve was already talking about like, everybody's got to be able to do everything, and so that really helped me as a coach, because like there are times this year we probably could have posted up our guards, and I'm going to blame myself. Like I didn't work on posting up a lot because we were small. And then I sit here and I look at some times at the end of the season where we could have done that, not just with Marshall, but some of our other guards. And, and reminding myself and going back to those days where I learned like swing and flex and motion, teach everybody to do everything. And so I think that's where we're at now. You go from where, guys were screeners and movers, and then you go, okay, well, we're going to run triangle, and these guys are going to be posts, and these guys are going to be guards, and now you're at a point where it's like, man, anybody who can dribble, pass, and shoot, you're handling the ball. And if you can't, you're probably going to be a screener and a finisher for us, and maybe that doesn't look traditional, right? Like watching Gonzaga last night, and Chet Holmgren reminds you of that. But, I look at what our guys did this year, and, we found roles, but Tom is probably one of the best at DePaul at doing that. You got Cam Lewis, who's a guard, is 6 feet tall, playing the 4, because that's a role he bought into, and it was the role that best helped us win games, and he did. And you end up going downstate because you get kids like that to buy into roles like you were talking about. So I mean, he may be a 5'11", 6'4" man, but you know what? He's always in the right spot on defense. He doesn't turn the ball over. He can hit open shots, and he's always talking. And so you kind of find, I think I've evolved my coaching as to pigeonholing kids into spots just because you're tall or you can do this, to, okay, like these are the skills you can do. All right, you need to be a playmaker for us, right? These are the skills you have. You need to kind of do your work off the ball, and it doesn't matter how tall you are. You may be, 6'5", but you might be our best guard. Maybe you're 5'11", but you're tough as hell and you're going to rebound and you're going to guard. And, we switch like they do at DePaul, so you're going to get up and pressure and you're going to fight and dive in the floor and take charges. Right. So, yeah, I feel like it's easier to find roles for guys now because we're not pigeonholing them so much in motion offenses that are so structured.
That flex is still around. Providence was running it yesterday.
I saw that video clip this morning. Yeah.
They were going after it. All right. So you mentioned analytics. You're a math teacher. So let's talk about how you feel those are important in basketball coaching, right? We talked about how we've evolved, right? So now you have all those stats. You don't have to go sit down with the VHS and chart every single possession and this and that. You can just open up Huddle. For the most part, it's pretty close. And then what specific analytics do you look at to decide if your team's doing the right things? And it doesn't matter win or loss, just you're on the right path. You're doing the right things offensively and defensively.
I would say probably 3 of the features I like the most on Huddle are one, just the box score, right? Like after a game, because I'm probably like most guys, we all have an iPad on the bench. So that way we can have halftime talks and make adjustments, as the game's going on and seeing, who's playing well, who's not, what are we doing well against them? And, what's the data look like? You have your meeting at half and you make adjustments. But when I'm looking at that Huddle data, there's times I'm like, man, like I'm a nerd, right? Like you said, math teacher, I teach stats. Like I love all that stuff. I could sit here, break down regressions and start doing tests with stuff if I wanted to. But, like to me, like in high school, some of the things I'm seeing with guys is like, hey, simple's better, right? Less is more kind of thing. So when I'm pulling it out, I don't get too deep outside of the box score. And then I'll look at what we're doing as a team holistically for the season, which Tom always did a lot. And that really helped me learn where to look for and what to look for. And then the last piece is that I got into more this year was lineups, right? Like Huddle will track all your lineups. And so over Christmas break, that gave me some time to do that. And I really learned a lot about our team. And I think that was probably just one thing out of many that helped us be better the second half of the season. Outside of the fact that we played a really rough schedule for a team that's rebuilding, all 4A schools during Christmas, we probably weren't ready for that at the time. But helped me look at what are our best lineups. And I found out it was when we were small, and I said, really fortunate to have a kid like Marshall, who's probably a once in a generation kid in Antioch, on and off the court, but moving him as much as I wanted to play him on the wing, because that's probably where he's going to play in college is the 1 through 3. There were times at the end of games we're moving him to the 4 and the 5 because he's our best athlete around the rim. He's our leading rebounder. And luckily, as a freshman, he wasn't being hard-headed about that. He would just take on that role. We had multiple times where Joe Newman fouled out, and he's our center. And he's an all-state tight end, and I think he's ranked 3 in the state right now. And we're playing Lakes with 6'7" Brock Marino, and Marshall's guarding him in the high post while they're running chimp. So it's again, you talk about buying and how all the stuff ties in. I'm using the data, and then I'm going back to the guys saying, hey, we got to do this, and this is how we're going to finish games if we want to win. And it paid off for us. I was trying to play too big earlier in the season instead of putting probably what was our best combination of 5 on the floor, and it made a big difference for us. So that's just one example of, I think, analytics this year of what I've done in terms of looking at box scores again, looking at our whole season, and then looking at, the lineups portion of it, which can be kind of daunting if you don't know what you're looking at, right? Because it literally tracks every combination you have. So I sat there with my assistant coach and, we went through it and, looked at, okay, offensively, okay, rebounding wise, turnover wise. All right. And then on the defensive end of the floor, what are our opponents doing against these lineups? And, I said we started the season turning the ball over 20 plus times a game, got down to 14, 15 a game, which is still too many, but it was better. Right. And then all our shooting percentages went up 5% in every category. So I just feel like that is invaluable because, again, you don't have to sit there and do it on your own. I'm already up late at night cutting up film, and I'm in my 2B baby room. We got one due in June, and I'm like, man, how am I going to be up till midnight cutting film? So having that to me is it was helpful for our team this year. It made a big difference in what we were doing.
So kind of in going with that, the teaching and the using of analytics is kind of the why of everything. And we were talking to our last guest, Cole Hunton of Amundsen, just about the communicating of the why and what you're doing with your players. So, how much for you personally do you go about communicating the why of what you're doing to your players?
Actually, you know what? I won't forget this meeting we had. So once I got done going all through that, and then we applied it after Christmas, we had another sit down meeting about halfway through conference, right? So we got to play our conference twice, which is, different in the Catholic League. It's like, if we can get by Loyola once, I'm good, because I don't got to see him again. Thank God, because I hate playing against that defense. It's impossible to score. So you got to go back through your schedule again and play all these guys. It's like, okay, we got to get better. So that was my next stopping point of data, is stopping halfway through the league and going, okay, what do we got to do? And so I sifted through it, and then we had a big meeting, right? So I print off the data that I want the kids to focus on. I don't just hand them everything, right? Like, I'll screenshot it, drop it. Okay, let's look at this. Sometimes I did that with just my guys who got most of the minutes, right? There's a point in the season I printed off the turnovers that we had for every guy who played a lot of minutes for us. And I'm like, guys, tell me what you noticed, right? But that's how I start that conversation. I have a sheet, and it asks them just a few questions, but it's like a teacher, right? You give somebody a worksheet, and you got to do the reading, and you got to notice what's going on. And so I'll have a sheet I print off, and I'll ask them questions. Okay, what do you notice? And I'll give them time, right? Like I'm teaching in class. And then they do it individually. And then I put them in groups by position. So I got the guards, the wings, and the forwards. Okay, what do you guys notice? And we did breakout rooms. So I had me in one room, my assistant in a room, and one of my other assistants in another room. And then all the rooms came together at the end, and we shared out on the whiteboard. Right now, it's not like everybody's got that much time in the day, so we did it on a Saturday. But I just felt it was really necessary for our guys to see that and recognize it with, again, not me just telling them and being the general up in front and saying, okay, this is what's going on. They were able to identify where we had to get better. And we were shooting 25% from three, but I printed out all our conference games, and our three guards were shooting over 40%. I said, well, why aren't we getting these guys more shots? Right. And then my guy in the middle started getting more confident in the middle, and he's scoring 60% of the time when he's touching. I'm like, why aren't we giving him the ball more? We're going to get luckily 13-6 out of our stud freshmen, but we're not going to win games if you guys aren't going to start maximizing our efficiency in the categories that we are best efficient at. And again, we got better, right? Like, we weren't shooting a lot of threes. We were shooting like 7 or 8 a game because we couldn't, but we put the work in during the season, and they got more confident. And by the end of the year, we had 3 or 4 guys whose shots got better. And it's like, guys, we got teams taking 23s against us. So we got to start knocking down some threes, because eventually we're going to see somebody and they're going to hit, 5, 6, 7. Or in Woodstock's North case, they threw in 10 in the first half. Like, how are you going to come back from that? You're not. So, that's another part of combining the analytics and also the why. So yeah, we did that breakout rooms. The guys looked at the data, they posed it to each other in their rooms. Then we all came together and they all threw up what they saw. And luckily you saw a lot of common trends. But that's something I did like at the end of January, right? Like, we wouldn't have been able to do that back in November, December, right? This was after, and you could ask the guys, this is one of their favorite things of the season. They love to knock me on, but we had 4-hour Saturdays to start the season, right? We're coming in, we're watching film, we're practicing for 2 hours, and then we're lifting, and nobody ever asked these guys to do that before, and it was tough for them, but we were better for it by the end of the season. And we won't have to do that next year, right? Because now our guys know how to navigate huddle. I know, you can tell who's watching and who's not, right? So I don't have to do as much teaching on the analytics side, but, doing a lesson like that to bring out the why we're doing to the players so that they're identifying it, and then we can find common ground on it, I think is really important.
That might be the best feature on Huddle, the minutes watched to film, right?
Absolutely, man. Then they can't say, oh, I was watching on Nate's account. No, you weren't.
Right, exactly.
Watch on your own account.
Exactly. So I wanted to talk to you. You've coached so many good players and had so many experience. There's like 900 something college players now in the transfer portal. I I wanted to talk to you about kind of the trickle down effect of the transfer portal now that's starting to get to high school, where I forget who it was. One of the NCAA teams had like 4 transfers in their starting lineup, right? So now these guys are going, they have aspirations to play college basketball. How is that affecting our high school athletes now?
Yeah, I mean, you look at Providence, you're just talking about, they got 5 grad transfer students playing, 2 seniors, a redshirt junior. It's like they're older than most of the G League teams. It's crazy. But just being honest, our kids are going to have to make a choice, right? Like, if you're not a dude, right, you're viably a dude that is noticeable. Those guys who flew under the radar and snuck into low majors, in D2s or even a mid sometimes, like, that's just not going to happen right now, right? You still got 3 years left of guys who got an extra year. And I was talking to a buddy who's a huge analytics nerd, and he's been coaching D1 for a while. But he said it was over 50% of the kids that got the extra year came back. Right. So luckily for the high school kids, that group got cut in half. There's a lot of dudes that said, no, I'm good. I'm going to move on with my life, whatever you're going to do. So luckily, if you guys know math and exponential functions and how they work, you're probably going to get an exponential decline, right? Exponential decay. And you're going to see, another however many percent of that group leave out this year, plus the graduates. So I think that's a good thing for the kids to know, that those leftover guys that got that COVID year are actually rapidly decreasing. But you have all these coaches saying we want to get older, right? So, with the one-time transfer rule, and I am all about it. Like, I think if you're not happy, I was glad the IHSA changed the rule, right, for freshmen, right? If a freshman went to a private school and they didn't pick the right school, or they went to a public school and they want to go private, they can transfer and at least they can play on the sophomore team. Whereas before they had to sit out a whole year. It's like, why are you knocking a 14-year-old for making a decision that wasn't correct? Especially if you got parents that don't know anything about the process while they're trying to choose a high school. So, I think that applies here. You get guys who get the opportunity to transfer one time and don't have to sit. Good for them. But I think, what was it last year? They said it was over 2,000 kids from D1 and D2. And like you said, right now we're almost at 1,000. So our kids now have to keep an open mind. If you're not open, right, if you're not going to be open to playing NAI or D3, which you should be, and you should look at it, right, financially. We all know you got grades, you fit the right socioeconomic status or the demographic, they'll throw you a lot of money. It's going to be really trying for the kids to make a decision on, I think you're going to find out, do you really love to play? Right. Like, I've had those conversations with a couple of my guys going to be seniors next year, and this is what's expected of you, right? Like, just as a manager, I'm waking up at 4:45 a.m. to get out to the arena in October so the guys can do 6 a.m. conditioning. And you want to know why Jim Phillips is running the ACC after being at Northwestern and then IU's, because he'd already be on the treadmill when I got there. He was a manager in college too. So, I share stories like that to guys. You're talking about dudes not even on the team that are getting there that early to get stuff ready. What do you think is going to be expected of you as a player? And some go, yeah, man, I don't know if I can give up every day like that. I don't know if that's for me. So I think it's really going to make guys reflect on, how much do you love this? Because if you're not going to take, a small college offer, if you're lucky enough to get one, then, right, it's JUCO or post-grad. And we all know the post grads, they're not really trying to take just anybody, correct? That, Troy, you and Troy have been doing that for a while, like I have. You better be a dude too. Otherwise you're going to have to find a post grad and we're going to pay 40 grand just to play. And I'm really hoping all of this changes the image of JUCO, right? Because you're going to have some different cats going to JUCO who would have never considered it before, but it's the only place you're going to get some playing time to prove yourself at the college level. So I think there's some really good that comes out of this in terms of really narrowing down, like, how much do you love playing college ball? And I think it's going to actually amp up the amount of talent that you see going to JUCO until these COVID extra years filter out. Because then I'm going to be curious to see what college coaches do now. Okay, you don't get all these extra guys hanging around. So high school kids are going to have to be recruitable again. But I still, think it's going to, if you're not a dude again, or you're not physically ready to go, look at the 7-3 kid from Bartlett. Like, he can't get a sniff at a Division I offer. Everybody wants him to go post grad, But I'm sitting here going like, okay, well, if you don't do that, what if you go JUCO and you want a red shirt? Like then a coach still knocks you because you haven't played. And, like, so I feel like some of these D1 guys are like trying to have their cake and eat it too. And so when all these extra players go out, I'm going to be curious to see again how everything changes. Because like you said, the trickle down effect is going to be different now because you don't have all these extra grad transfer dudes in there. But, not just with the transfer portal, but like I said, international kids. I looked up, I posted it on Twitter the other day. I think I looked up San Francisco's roster. They have 7 guys from overseas and they're not from the same country. It's not St. Mary's where they got the Australian pipeline going,
Right.
So high school kids, man, like, I think some of them don't understand like what you got to do to put yourself in a position. And then by the time they realize that it's too late. So, I do hope it changes the image of JUCO. I think you'll start seeing more kids who are dedicated to it going into it and kids who don't realize it getting out. But to me, that's an information thing, right? Like these kids these days have access to anything they need to make a decision. And there's not a BS we know out there too. But, like new company like Honest Game that's doing the academic side of things, and then coaches getting more knowledgeable what's going on because you can hear it, see it, read it, videos everywhere. So the portal's been bad for high school players, but I think it's good for the game overall because all of this is going to start weeding out kids who aren't putting in the work.
So we wanted to kind of get into a little bit of the NCAA tournament with you. And, Todd and I are always interested when we talk to our guests that, are watching the NCAA tournament, men's or women's, and maybe just some takeaways you have taken from watching some of the tournament games that you can use or apply to your high school players.
Yeah, talk about video, right? Like you got threads of guys posting like clips of offensive sets. Like, so I'm sending stuff to my kids, right? Like, I'm like, check this. So I'm up watching the game late last night and a couple of my guys know it. And all of a sudden I'm getting texts and they see the press break play that Gonzaga runs, I believe, at the end where you got the 5 guys on the baseline.
Yeah, the football route play. Yeah.
Yeah. And Tom ran that against Leo the other night in the Elite 8. And so all of a sudden my guys are like, Coach, we got to put that in next year, right? Like, so that lets me know like these guys are taking interest in the game. And so I think the takeaway for the high school kids is there's so much information on social media that you can learn from an X's and O's standpoint, right? About guys clipping out stuff at games and immediately putting on social media. But the fact that, like I got guys up at 10:45, maybe good or bad, but it is Saturday, so maybe not terrible, but texting me and each other about like press breaks they see and stuff. I'm like, okay, this, I think we're buying in now. So to me, one of the takeaways is learning as a basketball player, seeing what these guys are doing under immense pressure and what's working and what's not working. And then I turn to go to them like, guys, we got 6 press breakers. We play North Chicago, who presses you the whole game and traps. So you got to keep mixing it up so they don't get in a rhythm of where to rotate and trap. And you want to add in another one. But number 1 takeaway is video. And number 2, this ties into the recruiting stuff. Like, you can watch NAIA, you can watch JUCO, you can watch D3, right? Elmhurst made the national championship. Triton's in the Final Four for D1 JUCO. Pagani,
Suburban, yeah,
undefeated D2 JUCO. Rock Valley made the Final Four of the D3 JUCO. Like, you guys can watch these other levels and see what it's like and understand it ain't easy. That it's just as hard, if not harder. And a lot of guys who end up at those levels, as you and I and John know, like, it's probably because something happened. Why did I end up at DePaul Prep? I screwed up in Naperville North. I got egotistical. I got comfortable. They let me go as a teacher, and maybe it was good for me because it reset me and made me take a different path and learn something about myself in life that I maybe didn't know. And so all these guys in these second chance schools sometimes is what you call them, but you got to be a dude to play in those games, man. And I've followed it because I've had guys play at all different levels from AAU, luckily enough, and so for the tournament, to me, I hope another takeaway is these guys is not just watching the NCAA, but the other tournaments, and then realizing like a school like St. Peter's, we see it Cinderella all the time, but dude, it ain't Cinderella. Like these dudes can hoop, and they got a great coach, right? So you see what can happen when you get that kind of mixture together. But let these guys know that going to the name school, the high major school, the mid, right, the low, like there's opportunity everywhere. You just got to seize it. I had more guys playing pro ball overseas who did not go D1 than guys that I coached in AAU that played D1. Right. So right there, like it's not about level, man. It's about opportunity and where can you get better, and so I hope kids start seeing more of this, that it's not about going to the big school, but unfortunately, quick piece of data, a friend of mine that coached at Illinois Springfield's a recruiter for them now. And he was speaking at our school the other day, and he told me during COVID, well, what happened when we got out of it? Where did everybody go to college? All the names, right? Like names they're familiar with. So he had a hard time getting kids going to Springfield, even out of the demographics they usually get, because they're not a name. So I unfortunately with advertising stuff, I think it still exists. So we just have to continue to work harder as coaches and advocates and mentors, to keep showing these kids where they can go see, so that they understand, like, it's not about level, and that you can make yourself a better basketball player by watching these games, because there's so much information out there now in terms of X's and O's. And, guys who are trying to get video jobs are clipping stuff up and throwing it on social media. It's like free knowledge, that you wouldn't have got before, because you would have had to go to a coaching clinic just to hear about it.
Yeah, I mean, I look at just in Illinois, I use this example all the time. Just go watch a CCIW game. Just go sit and watch a CCIW game, and you talk about some dudes. There's a lot of dudes there. All right, so I want to transition to skill development. All right, I'm gonna pin you down here a little bit. You only get 3 things in skill development. Your top 3. For whatever reason, these are the only things you could do. They held the gun to your head and said, these are the only 3 things you can do in your practice as far as skill development. What would they be?
So first one's going to be shot mechanics. But before that, I always start with footwork. So I'm going to go footwork, shot mechanics. And then once we have that, when we're doing ball handling, it's full speed, full court, going around cones, live games, going off the 2 feet. So, when I think, you can do stuff defensively, right? But, like this is literally what I'm going to do in June. We're going to focus on shot mechanics. We're going to incorporate footwork. And then any ball handling we're doing in the open court live, going around obstacles, right? Chairs, cones, whatever it is you got. Because the game's so fast now. Like, I don't know if you guys still know anybody who's, especially I know in the girls' games, I see a lot of permanent pivot foot. And I don't know if you guys have those conversations, but I just feel like the game's too fast. Like, you've got to be able to pivot off both feet, so we're working footwork, reverse pivot, outside pivot, both feet, catching on both wings with that footwork, and then when we're doing full speed ball handling stuff, the footwork then incorporates the balance piece of it, so when we're rising into shots or going off 2 feet, but to me, like, you can work on those shot mechanics, right? But if you don't work on the footwork, all that upper body shot mechanic stuff doesn't happen, because you don't have the lower body. We all know they have to go together. Now, maybe that's just a focus for me right now, because that's what my team needs for next year. We're giving up 54 points a game. And by the time we, got our defense down by the end of the season, we were giving up 43. So I feel like we got our defense in place. So all my focus right now in skill development is going to be on the offensive side of the ball, but it wasn't last summer, right? Like, if you would have asked me when I took over the team last June, I probably would have told you defensive slides, boxing out technique, and then diving on the floor for loose balls. Like, that's what I was doing last summer. We weren't even working on anything on the offensive end. So if you're saying offensive skill development, those would be my 3: footwork, shot mechanics, and open court, full court ball handling around obstacles on balance.
Like it. All right, so let's move to our last 2 segments here. 30-second timeout. Your dime, your dance floor. Anything you want to talk about? And you kind of previewed it earlier. So you're very loose 30-second timeout. No referees telling you first horn, nothing like that. Trying to hustle you out. So it's all you.
Yeah, we all know who's going to be watching this stuff, but you hope it's some younger coaches, that are getting information out of this, because it's what you guys started it for. Find mentors in coaching. again, because I coached at like 8 different schools before I got this job, that was different for me. My mentors naturally happened because it was guys I worked for. You get some guys, you just kind of stay in 1 or 2 programs the whole time, and maybe you only know those coaches on that staff. Find a guy like a Matt Monroe who will go out of his way to help you. You find guys on the AAU side of things that can help you. I think everybody's got information to share. And so it's so important as a coach that you go find different mentors. Like, I know I can call and text Tom any time of day. He'll get back to me because he loves me and he'll help me out any way he can. But like you guys said, you're always going to pick something away from somebody, so in the way guys do things, the way guys see things, might align a little bit more with what you're trying to see. So go find multiple mentors. And just to share this out, Monroe's been talking with the IBCA about creating a mentoring program for new head coaches. So I think that would be fantastic for the state of Illinois, to like, hey, you're a new head coach. Here's a guy in the IBCA, join up. This is going to be your mentor, because I think we all need one, because we're not talking about X's and O's, right? We're really talking about all this stuff you got to do off the court. And I mean, you guys been paying attention last week. There's already been like 10, 12 coaches, that are out of position. When's the last time all 3 main schools didn't have a head boys basketball coach at the same time? You're like, what's that tell you about coaching right now, man? It is tough, outside all the stuff we had to go through with COVID, but, again, dealing with your administrators and the building culture and parents and players and all the other stuff that comes with it, as you guys know, outside of tracking inventory for gear. And, I think, we know I was lucky as a young guy. I knew what I was getting into, but I don't know if everybody does when they say, I want to be a varsity coach, what really comes with that. So go find yourself some mentors outside of just the guys you've been working under.
I always tell people that want to be a varsity coach, you'll find out 90% of your job has nothing to do with basketball.
Amen.
All right. So we want to go to our last segment, which is quick hitters. I've actually added a couple, but these are just fun questions. So we'll start off with best place to eat in Antioch.
Man, you guys put me in a tough spot. I'm trying to get donations and I've only been there 8 months. I'll put it out there because people know I'm there. Cornicione's, but Kaliak Modest family owns it. Their son was Illinois Gatorade Player of the Year in football, and he's at Minnesota now. And it's literally kitty corner from the school, so that's probably one reason is location. But they got some great Italian food, and they also have 2 slices and a pop for $5. Hard to turn down.
Yeah, you can't turn that down. That's good stuff right there.
It's
all
good.
Right. So your funniest story of an interaction with an official.
Oh boy. Oh Lord. I'm sure you can imagine it more came from AAU than it. I'm sure. Yeah. So I'm coaching down on the west side in the city. I think it was full package at the time, and we're playing in the D Rose shootout down at the Salvation Army gym that got built down on 115th Street. And I know most of those dudes because being in the city for so long. I'm trying to like have fun with the referee because I kind of know him a little bit, and they were really feeling my jokes at the time because we're playing D Rose and it's a heated game, and I got West Side kids and they got West Side kids. And then I just kind of made a joke, about a foul that they didn't call, but I was trying to be lighthearted about it. Oh man, I got lit up with 2 texts and thrown out of the gym. And you're sitting there as a coach, you're going like, all right, what did I do that caused that? But it was a great learning lesson for me as a young coach. Like, I think you got a relationship with some people, but in the wrong moment in a heated game, you never know where somebody's mind's going to be, especially if it's an AAU rep that's been there all day. So that's my, I would say my funniest for me, because I had to laugh it off at the end, and I was trying to crack jokes the whole time. But it wasn't so funny in the officials' eyes.
All right. So you kind of talked about the generation thing. So that's where I got this, because I feel like nobody in the younger generation eats breakfast. Are you more of a breakfast or dinner guy?
Breakfast all day. I'll eat it anytime, anywhere. Eggs is my thing.
All right. Texting people or calling? Are you a text or call guy?
It's hilarious. I never forget when I got my first cell phone and people started texting, and I'm like, I'm never going to do that. And now I'm sure if you talk to anybody I know, I'm in like 3 friend groups with coaching that we text all the time, and I'm a texter. But I do appreciate a phone call, a little bit of old school too, but I probably text way more than I call.
All right, so you talked about the referees in AAU, but now and this doesn't even have to be an on the court AAU story, but your best or one of your favorite AAU stories.
All right, so I'm not going to tell you time and location, but it was when I had my Velocity kids and I was like 25 years old and had no idea what I was doing. And I, felt like I had the team of white West suburban kids that needed a little culturing. So we went down to Thornton Fractional North and played in a shootout out of our element. And here's what went down from my perception. Thornton Fractional's gym is great, but the two side courts are 3/4 courts. So they're not regulation length. And the outside out of bounds lines cut off on the wing. So clearly this guy who was good friends with the tournament director was pretty pissed off that they had to play us. And he, being a jerk, knowing that I wasn't going to be able to win playing man, sat in a 3-2 zone. So imagine playing at Leo, but with like less room on the sideline. Like impossible, right?
Mm-hmm.
So we end up winning the game, and then I go to the bathroom while I'm hanging around waiting to play. It was a semifinal, so we were moving to the championship, smaller tournament. And I shit you not, but there was a really, really soft handshake that had a big gap in between with some green in the middle. And, I think the tournament director felt bad for his guy that he put him in that situation and gave him some money back, I guess.
Oh.
But, I think that's probably one of the weaker $100 handshakes that you'll find in AAU. I'm sure there's many more that go down that most of us don't see, especially in the bathrooms, because that used to be the spot to go if you're a college coach looking for a player.
Favorite gym to coach in, not Antioch or DePaul?
Wow. That's a great question, man. You know what? I'm not going to lie, and this is probably recency bias, but Sterling's got a fantastic gym. That was something else to play in that facility. I know they hosted a super, I think, this year too. Ryan Vasquez, great dude. I was glad we went out there to play because I think it was good culture for my guys to learn that we have it very easy with all our opponents being about 30 minutes from our school, and Sterling's got to drive 3 hours to play Quincy on the road in conference, right? So I would say, like, so far, again, recency bias, but Sterling's probably been my favorite, that I can remember from late.
All right, so in that same vein, but kind of the opposite, what's the hardest gym for you to coach in as an opposing coach?
Oh, it's Leo. I hate playing there. It's almost as bad as Providence St. Mel, because Providence St. Mel really makes you feel like you're boxed in. At least Leo has a couple sets of rows of bleachers on each side of the floor. But man, that senior group that Tom had this year, when I had him, we won the conference, but we had 4 losses. You tell me the last time you saw a team in the Catholic League, ESCC, wherever, win the conference with 4. You don't get 4. Yeah. We just had a lot of parity. But Leo went into that 1-2-2 half court trap with that group they had this year. And like, we just couldn't do anything with it. We only lost by 11, but I just do like playing in that gym. If you got length, man, it's hard to score if you can't get out in transition.
All right. Your favorite high school rivalry?
Oh, you know what? This is going to sound really weird being a kid who grew up from Woodstock. But when I was out recruiting for AAU, I got to go to a Brother Rice Marist game, and that was absolutely bonkers. So Connor Gledden's dad, Mike, is a really nice guy, keeps in touch with me, kind of gives me advice from time to time. Was like, hey, go here and get some pizza, but you better get to the game like halftime as sophomore, otherwise you're not getting a seat. I mean, that thing was packed. And so I would say, just from an experience standpoint, that game and that rivalry in that gym, that was something I hadn't seen in a long time.
Well, Coach, we can't thank you enough for jumping on with us. There's a lot of great stuff in here that I know our coaches will be able to take for their own programs. And, like John said, we're learning stuff here as we go too. So we appreciate you taking the time here to join us, and, look forward to what you got going on in the next couple of years at Antioch.
No, this is a lot of fun. Thanks for having me, guys. I love talking hoops. This was great.
Thank you for listening to another episode of the After the Timeout podcast, hosted by Todd Zazadil and Jon Plicki. For more show content and upcoming episodes, follow us on Twitter at After the Timeout, or subscribe to our podcast for upcoming episodes. For show inquiries, you can email us at afterthetimeout@gmail.com. You can find all of our previous episodes on Anchor, Spotify, Breaker, Radio Public, Pocket Casts, Google Podcasts, and Apple Podcasts by searching After the Timeout. We appreciate you listening. Tune in next time for more coaching content in-game, out of the game, and anything in between.